Lead Time is a podcast of the Unite Leadership Collective, hosted by Tim Lawson and Jack Caliberg. Lead Time taps into biblical wisdom for practical solutions to today's burning issues. Each podcast confronts real-time struggles facing the local church in a post-Christian culture. Step into the action with the ULC at uniteleadership.org. This is Lead Time.
Happy day. Welcome to Lead Time. Tim Lawson here with Jack Caliberg, and we have a wonderful guest today. He is my brother from another mother, but he is actually my brother-in-law, Pastor Tim Lawson from Saving Grace right here in Queen Creek. And our church is Christ Greenfield, Saving Grace. We work very close. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. But before we get into that conversation, Tim, would love to hear from you. I'd love to hear, why do you do what you do, and a little bit of your story, bro.
Yeah.
Thanks for hanging.
Thanks for having me. A little bit about why I do what I do. I guess it all goes back to people believing and trusting in me when I was really young. People had poured into my life, not only my parents, but some amazing church leaders, and said, hey, I see something in you that I think you have to offer to the church. And so really at a really young age, I said, hey, I think being a pastor is something that I might want to pursue. So that is not to say throughout my entire high school years, I said, I'm going to be a pastor, but the Holy Spirit was working on me nevertheless throughout some of those difficult times. And that's why I am where I am, because people poured into me.
Tim, is there any specific relationships that were key in kind of mentoring you towards ministry that you can think of? My
parents, they were in the Lutheran school system, so both as administrators and teachers, and they certainly spoke into my life and said, hey, I think that this is something that if you do want to pursue it, you certainly have a gifting to do it and do it effectively. So then they connected me and made sure that I was connecting with my pastor as well. I had several different pastors growing up, all of which were amazing and had different qualities and skill sets. And they just encouraged me to continue on this pathway. So it wasn't any one individual or any one aha moment. It was just a life of consistently being encouraged to pursue this path.
We teach consistently, Tim, the I see in you conversation, and it sounds like there are just a lot of those. And it's same in my story. People who just said, "Hey, I can see the Lord really moving in your life. You've got a certain set of skills that could be useful for pastoral ministry. You love people, you love Jesus, love telling people about Jesus, and off you go." Are you ingraining? Because you've been working now with the Unite Leadership Collective for a few years. Are you ingraining some of those I see in you principles as you kind of disciple the next generation of Jesus followers?
Absolutely.
At Saving Grace?
I never had a creative name attached to it, but the ICNU definitely puts that creativity behind it. I think we always did it organically, but now having a creative name to put behind it makes it even more real for our congregation and the folks that I'm talking to and trying to raise up as leaders as well. They latch on to that phrase. It's easy to understand. They can have these conversations with, frankly, anybody that they come in contact with. If they have a relationship with them, they understand that they can effectively say, I see something in you that you have to offer to the church and the wider body of God's kingdom.
It really is very simple, but in my experience, it simply doesn't happen unless leaders infuse it into the culture. So praise be to God, Tim. Powerful. Before we get into a number of other kind of practical partnership, how our churches work together, I wrote a blog recently called Leadership is Hard, and you could really just say that life is hard. Life is infused with sin and suffering and loss, and you don't need to get into the entire story unless you'd like to, brother. But you lost your mom in a tragic car accident. How many years ago is that now? It seems like 10, maybe. Over a decade. And what did Jesus teach you because you were already a pastor. You'd been in ministry for 5, 6, 7 years or so. What did the Lord teach you through that amazingly horrendous grief
it's
journey?
Interesting that you wrote a blog about life is hard. When I was a 26-year-old pastor fresh out of seminary, I would have probably disagreed with you. I remember my first week serving as pastor, getting together with a large staff and having a staff retreat. And I was that 26-year-old pastor, and we were going around the room, and the question was, hey, what are some things that have challenged you in your life? What are some difficulties that you have? We're going to spend some time to pray about them. And people were going around the room, and it was like cancer. I've had cancer. My spouse has died. And I'm sitting there trying to think as a 26-year-old, what catastrophe can I share with everybody else that legitimizes my existence in their world? And to be honest, as a 26-year-old, I was like, yeah, I'm sorry. I just recently got engaged. Life is great, right? And I could have never imagined how life would have changed and shortly thereafter. And so, yeah, like you'd mentioned, my mom passed away in a tragic car accident. I share this story, and so much time has passed that the raw emotion of it all isn't as needling, but nevertheless, it does bring up in my quieter moments some times of stress and sadness, even to this day. So June 19th, 2010, my Aunt Debbie had actually passed away the day that I picked my mom up from the airport. She had been suffering from basically organ failure in her mid-50s and passed away. And my mom was arriving to the airport to make funeral arrangements for my Aunt Debbie and be with the family. So picked my mom up from the Omaha airport. I was living in Omaha at the time, and was making the 1-hour trip to her hometown where she grew up to make those funeral arrangements. We also had my brother-in-law with us, Josiah, who was, I believe, 6 at the time, and was serving as his babysitter on that day. So he got to make the car trip with us. He was in the back seat in his car seat. My mom was in the passenger seat. We were just traveling along, and a semi just rear-ended us and then pushed us into oncoming traffic. We were then T-boned by an SUV going the opposite direction on the passenger side. And so, like within seconds, my life was changed forever. I blacked out during the whole ordeal. When I came to, we had a good Samaritan talking to me. I could hear Josiah crying in the background, but it was what I didn't hear that was like the most crushing thing, and I didn't hear my mom. And I remember asking the good Samaritan, how's my mom doing? And truth be told, I don't know if she responded or not, but I reached over and held my mom's hand, and I could just feel it growing colder and colder. And I wasn't all there at the same time, but just kind of knew that my mom had been called to be with the Lord. It's not easy, but at the same time, I know where she is. I would say the most difficult thing of the entire experience wasn't the actual accident. It was getting into an ambulance, kind of falling asleep again, blacking out again, getting to Creighton Hospital at the time. And then I was the one that had to make the phone call to my dad, who was not in Omaha at the time. For a son to have to tell his dad, who's completely unsuspecting, that my mom, his wife, had just passed away. I mean, that's what gets me. I mean, that I don't wish that upon anybody, to have to make that phone call. And so, yeah, I mean, through all of this, while it has been not the easiest thing to deal with, I would say that it has actually strengthened my faith. it has made me not just a more effective pastor in terms of care, but a more effective husband and father, because I feel like I have a bigger perspective on life. And I would not have had that had this accident not happened. So not to say that I'm happy about the whole ordeal, but God uses, even through the midst of tragedy, things that accomplish his will. And I can see the fruit, if you will, even in the midst of the destruction of what God is doing. Not only my life, but the life of my kids and the life of Josiah as well, and the whole extended family.
Wow.
Man, thanks, bud.
Tim, I've shared a little bit with folks, but I lost my mother recently too, and I can sympathize with your story. It wasn't probably as traumatic as what you went through, but I remember being in the hospital when my mother passed away and having to be the deliverer of the news to my father as well. And also the transformative impact of celebrating the life of somebody who was a believer in Jesus, and how that was a witness to other people in her family. And so, the story just resonates so much with me right now. And I can definitely see how God is at work even in the midst of suffering.
No doubt.
Yeah, Tim. My parents were actually in Israel at that time, and getting that call too, because we didn't actually know if Josiah was gonna make it. Pretty much a walking miracle too, because the traumatic brain impact, we thought, we just didn't know if he was going to come to, and if he did come to, what his quality of life would be, and the fact that he's now a student at GCU, and the Lord is good and gracious, and even through suffering and loss and death, we know the ultimate outcome. You know, people live today, Tim, like they're not going to die, right? In many respects, and whenever suffering and trial and loss, whether it be sudden over a long period of time, death is always the unwelcome guest, and it necessitates. Like, I don't really know how people make it apart, like through a struggle like that. Like your dad's faith through the story, man, at the funeral and everything, and still to this day, unbelievable.
Yeah.
What did the Lord teach you through watching your dad grieve as well,
I
Tim?
think people always hear the story and they might think, poor Tim. I've got pretty broad shoulders, and I feel like I handled it as best I could with counseling and help from others, no doubt about that. But my daily life wasn't completely altered. At the time, I was 30 years old. I was no longer living in my parents' house. My dad's life, on the other hand, was forever changed and forever altered in his daily routine. And I think he bore the brunt of the accident, certainly more than anybody else, even if he wasn't there when the accident actually took place. But seeing his faith and resolve throughout it all. You mentioned at the funeral, I remember gathering together at my mom's gravesite, and he said these words, "A better day is coming." And just the respect that I have for my dad in leading in the midst of tragedy, his family, is something that I will forever hold dear to me. In the midst of tragedy, I want to lead like my dad. I want to show the hope that we have in Jesus Christ, despite the destruction that exists around us. So yeah, those words, "a better day is coming," forever etched in my mind as his son.
Yeah.
Man. So good, Tim. Well, let's from darkness and suffering and death to life and just everyday life as a leader. We've got a lot of pastors who listen to Lead Time, and how are you balancing right now? I actually don't necessarily like the word balance. I'd rather prefer to use the word like fully present, like wherever my feet are, I want to be there. And how do you balance or be fully present with your primary vocation as husband and father and still maintain kind of a hard driving work ethic in growing a local congregation?
First off, I'm not an expert. I am a lifelong learner of how this actually is manifest in my own life and how I can learn best from others. We are in an interesting place here in Queen Creek in that it's one of the fastest growing places in the nation. The potential downturn of the economy doesn't seem to exist out here. And so there is a lot of potential for growth. And so we've been hitting the gas pedal. Just a little bit of context about where I'm serving at Saving Grace. We had been worshiping in a converted house. We recently just had a building dedication 3 months ago for a new 300-seat worship center and preschool. So I understand that where I'm at is not where everybody else is at in the nation and world in terms of ministry and the potential for growth. So God is blessing it, to be quite honest.
Tim, real quick, just to interject on there, how long had Saving Grace been worshiping out of this house?
Yeah, so we had been worshiping in the house for 7 years. Prior to that, we had been worshiping in middle schools for 13 years. So 20 years of Saving Grace's life was spent in temporary places of worship or a house that was gutted and remodeled to be a worship center. So the history of Saving Grace goes well beyond the 2 years of building and constructing the worship center that we have today. And I think that that's eye-opening for a lot of folks, even in our own community.
Yes. Yeah, because I think a lot of people, when they think about investing in ministry and, maybe something doesn't pan out in a year or two, we tend to get very short-sighted in our goals and what we think God is doing in a ministry. But we see here with Saving Grace that this is a crock pot moment where God is working over many, many years, and a lot of the things that are being realized are happening decades after its inception.
No doubt.
That's so good, because the future of the church right now, I do not think, Tim, is like huge, mega. I think it's a lot of smaller expressions of the gospel. This is why we talk a lot about the need for bivocational leaders stepping into ministry, because I think we're going to need more houses or creative spaces that are more financially reasonable for us to be in until the Lord, if the Lord chooses, as he's doing at Saving Grace, give growth. I don't think we've been hardwired to think that way, Tim, and view, like Jack is saying, the long run. This is multiple I could not see the fruit of my work, of my hands and resources in my lifetime, but it's worthy work. We want it now. And so any more to say about the change in mind shift for a leader if they find themselves in maybe a stagnant or a creative, let's use best construction, a creative worship environment right now? What would you say to them?
I recently heard the information put out by Tom Rainer recently that a larger church is 250 people or more worshiping on a Sunday. Prior to COVID, I had been reading books about breaking the 200 barrier, as it's called. And these books were written decades ago. I think it was written for a time period that has now passed us by. Whereas the thought was, after you eclipse over 200 people worshiping on a Sunday morning, you were considered not even a large church, but no longer a small church. Whereas I believe Tom Rainer put out that 0 to 50 is a small church, 50 to 100 is a mid-sized church, 100 to 250 is a large church. I could be getting those statistics wrong, but
that's right.
But our mindset of church and how many people are worshiping on a Sunday morning has shifted greatly. And I'm with you on the idea of having community and getting together with people that you appreciate and enjoy and can sharpen you and challenge you is best when the group isn't extremely large. And so, yeah, I think the future of the church is growing larger by growing smaller.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, couldn't agree more, dude. And I view Sundays and the preaching task. Everybody needs a word. Everybody needs sacrament for sure. But it is an opportunity for two things in addition to word and sacrament to happen. For training for the eager to take place. This is an equipping and sending station. And then frankly, for those of us that are in a larger church, for resources from those who kind of say, you know what, this isn't my calling right now to be discovered, developed, and deployed like we talk about, but I know it's a calling for many, many women and men here within my local congregation, and I want to be generous toward training them, releasing them, launching new ministries, etc. So, in anything, do you kind of view the same thing? I mean, let me go deeper in terms of preaching. Like anybody can get great preaching, be entertained, blah, 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 digitally today. So if we're solely saying, man, they're coming here just for me, to hear me kind of dispense, well, they can get that from anywhere, man. And they are actively. But if they know there's a pastor here that loves them, cares for them, is obviously growing in their preaching, they don't want to decline, they don't want to stagnate. Good law gospel preaching is fantastic. But they're also saying, you know, I'm here to be connected and then sent into my respective areas of influence to spread the gospel. We need more evangelists being deployed right now, more than ever. Consumer Christianity should be a thing of the distant past, man. I mean, I think we spoke about it, Tim, like against it for a season. Oh, consumer Christianity. COVID hit, and now who knows what the future holds? Oh my goodness, do people need the gospel, the truth of the gospel? So has your preaching understanding of your role as preacher evolved at all, especially in the last 4 or 5 years?
I mean, absolutely. Like you said, they can listen to the guru on any social media platform that they prefer. Obviously, I'd like to believe that I have something of value to offer when I preach, but at the same time, if they're looking for a perfect product, they're going to find that elsewhere. And we're not interested so much in perfection. We are interested in being genuine. And I think that we own that in the space that we're at, to be authentic and genuine, and that will win the day over a perfect product. Now,
Tim, can you elaborate more on that? What does it look like to try and be perfect versus being authentic? What does that actually look like in practice?
So I say everything that we do, we want to do with excellence. But I think that oftentimes we hear the word excellence and think perfection. When I say excellent, I mean that I want to excellently be in relationship with you. I don't want you to just know my name and me know nothing about you. I want to know your story as much as you know my story from my preaching. Now, obviously, you have to do that on scale. I can't know everybody in the way that I know my family. And so we have to be intentional about creating those spaces where they are known, people are known by someone that they are worshiping with, that they're in that genuine community with. So I don't want to give the impression that I'm not about excellence, but excellence, I would say, is not perfection, in that I would define perfection as we're going to put on something for you rather than provide something of value that you get to participate in as well.
Yeah. So it's a move away from, we'll use the word consumer for you versus relationship with you. That's really good.
Yeah, there's a lot of sociological studies, especially recently. People need, you need your family, and then you need to know you're tethered to a wider group of families. and then the max amount of connection that really a human needs is about 100 people. There's 100 people, and you think of almost like the village back in the day before we had, urbanization and such, that the village was where, man, if something goes on in my community, I am going to feel this overwhelming sense of love and care and support from people obviously I know deeply, and then those that I know at least their name and a little bit of their story, where they work and play and how they do life. That is at its core, I think, what the Lord is pruning the church back to right now is, do you have a group of 100 people who are going to be with you through the ups and downs of life, to celebrate and to weep with you? So I think a lot of times people listen to guys like us and, you may think, well, you guys are mega or this or that. It's like, no. I fully recognize what the Lord is doing right now. Smaller is in many respects better, but at the very same time, there are benefits of larger expressions of the faith as well. And let's get you just to economics and scale. These are not mutually exclusive things. So what would you tell congregations who are considering, Tim, working more closely together? So for those of you who do not know, Saving Grace, Christ Greenfield, because we have the relationship, he is my brother-in-law. He knows I don't want to compete or steal. We want to love and care and accelerate the growth of one another's ministries. We've been collaboratively writing sermons for some time now, and that's been so much fun. And our messages that we do are not just online, but they're at Queen Valley Lutheran. They're preaching a lot of the stuff we do, as well as Saving Grace and the 2 campuses that Christ Greenfield has. So what would you tell someone who's considering working more closely together? What could they start sharing and scaling, if you will? Tim?
One, let me just dovetail what you said. We're not about competing, and you live this out because we are about 25 minutes apart, our 2 churches, and you will have people that come visit Christ Greenfield, and the very next Sunday, they're at Saving Grace saying, hey, your brother, Pastor Tim, told me to come to Saving Grace because they're closer. So you're not just talking the talk, but you walk the walk. So that is awesome. And it just shows the level of trust and commitment to say we're not about competing, but we're about reaching people that don't know Jesus. In terms of sermon writing, and you alluded to this earlier in a previous question as well, how have I grown or how has Saving Grace benefited from a number of things, but one of those would be preaching. My preaching has exponentially grown in the past 4 years, and that is primarily because we have a sermon writing team where I have the privilege to get together with a group of folks from Christ Greenfield, and we plot out together what are the teaching series that we're going to do month to month, year to year. But we also then sit down and look at the text and that we're going to be preaching and determine, hey, what is God saying? And I think it's just grown, my preaching, that is, the past 4 years because of this process. It's no longer me just in a vacuum saying, what is the Lord saying about this particular text? And let me consult some commentaries. But it's doing that in a team setting, still looking at the text, bringing out some of the nuances of it, allowing other people to bring out things that I may have missed or not even considered. And then the creative side of it, no longer just trying to randomly pull out some sort of nugget of information or illustration that connects the dots for people week to week, but allowing other people to speak into that process and say, hey, have you ever thought about this story? This experience happened in my life, and I think it connects the dots effectively with this particular text. That has been a win day in and day out for the folks at Saving Grace in terms of what they hear Sunday to Sunday, because the preaching is better, because it's no longer me just doing it in a vacuum.
Yeah. Oh, Such good stuff, man. I love it.
Yeah,
Jack.
no, I've talked to a few families where, let's say, they've been connected to both ministries. We operate a big school here. So it's been really fascinating to talk to some families where they say, oh yeah, I was at worship at Christ Greenfield, but then I went over to Saving Grace, and boom, you're doing the exact same sermon series. It's like not even skipping a beat. And they love that. They love the fact that they knew that, hey, we can just go right over there and get the same kind of experience. And so that thing is being pushed out. I also wanted to ask you, you've been a participant with the ULC. Has there been, what does that look like to be a part of that collaboration? What are some of the things that you've benefited in that area?
When we first started off with the ULC years ago, we were worshiping about 100 folks, and you bring up the what does the small church have to learn from a larger church, or is a larger church just going to come in and tell us how we're deficient in all of our areas? That was not the case at all. I think Saving Grace has benefited immensely with the ULC. We talked about the IC and U conversations. It's little things like that have created a culture at Saving Grace that has allowed us to reach our potential in a way that we would not have been able to do. And I'll speak for me. I don't want to say we. When I say we, I mean me as well. It has allowed me to grow and be a more effective leader for the folks at Saving Grace. And without that encouragement and challenge and generation of ideas, quite honestly, the Saving Grace would not be where it is today without the partnership with the ULC.
Yeah.
Praise God. So if you're a pastor listening and you would like more information, uniteleadership.org. And we're starting our next accelerator cohort of churches working together to build a leadership development culture, systems, and structure. That's starting in August. And it would be a lot of fun to have you join us. And if you'd even want to set up an hour-long chat to get under the hood a little bit of what collaborative sermon writing looks like, we would love to do that with you, because I think a lot of people say, well, I may not trust that brother. You could work toward trusting them. We're honestly working towards scale. I don't know. I think the principles can scale, but I think between maybe 3 or 4 churches kind of working together, that may be the max, but then you could do that. Say you were in a circuit, you could have 2 different types and you would look to the context to determine probably who are in those circles. If one congregation has a similar context, our culture is very, very similar, well, it makes a lot of sense. Queen Creek is very similar to Gilbert, Arizona, right? Makes a lot of sense. The audience, the demographics are very, very similar. But maybe there's some older congregations, or it's a more urban center, rural center. Well, those churches, those families are dealing with similar things that the Word of God could influence them as well. I'm not fighting against a pericope. Some of you maybe, well, we just do the pericope here. We are seasonally sensitive in how we preach through the church calendar from Advent into the season of Pentecost. And so all of our series understand the time of the church year. So if you want more detail on that, we'd love to give that to you. Let's get a little bit higher level coming down the home stretch. Tim, this has been a lot of fun. You're the man, bro. We come from a long line of LCMS leaders. Jack and I have had a lot of LCMS leaders trying to dream new dreams for the future of our declining denomination, and dreaming about ways we could collectively reverse that trend. What are your dreams for the LCMS, and how do you believe we should change moving forward?
That's a loaded question.
Simple. Yeah, the real simple one, bro, for real. But what do you got?
The dream I dream is that we would trust one another. I don't know if it's not a specific program or policy, but it's a culture of trust. I would add this, a missional mindset. And when I say that, let me define that, because I think people would paint me in a corner when I say missional mindset. When I say missional mindset and use this phrase, what does a missionary do when they enter into a context? They understand the community that they're in. first and foremost, before they are ever going to say something about truth and about the person and work of Jesus Christ, they want to understand their audience. They want to understand the people that they're going to be speaking to. I think that this is biblical. Acts has something to say about this, right? And I would hope that we as a church body don't lose a missional mindset, that we allow pastors, church workers, people in our congregation, and trust them enough to get to know their community and understand how best to bring Lutheran theology into that particular context. That's my hope for our synod, that we would have leaders that understand we are about ministry, that we would develop a missionary mindset to know our community and understand that the context might dictate that pathways and ministries and policies don't have to look the same because the context isn't the same, and have the trust between one another to say, go for it in your particular context.
Tim, real quick, what do you think? What do you think could look different in an environment of abundance of trust? What might be some, let's use changes or just things that would look differently, maybe a little bit more than they do right now?
I think we're, and this is not indicative of our church body, but this is indicative of culture. We're so quick to have a hot take or an opinion, but we don't know the full story. And I would hope that as a church body, we're slow to speak and quick to understand. Let me understand your context and why you're doing what you're doing before I would speak into your particular context. So it's not one specific story that I have or one particular illustration that can prove my point, but it is just let's trust one another enough to say we're trying to accomplish the same thing, even though our methods might not always be the same.
Yeah, no, that you're speaking to culture, and if there isn't a culture of love and trust, like the systems and structures, you're going to try to govern through systems and structures and policy, and it's going to fall on deaf ears, and polarization will inevitably happen. The political climate of America will be what the church experiences, and that tastes like vomit in my mouth, bro. And it tastes like vomit in the mouth of Jesus as well. That's not what he came to do, came to establish. He came to establish a worldwide, cosmos-wide movement of people being drawn to him and following his work and ways in a variety of different contexts. And just if people get like, well, this is a soft thing. No, the church's first battle was about context. Acts chapter 15, right? What are we going to do with these outside pagan Gentiles? Are we going to circumcision? What policies do we need to put into place for them to be a part of the church? Nothing other than staying away from pagan idols. You know, there's some cultural things they were dealing with there as well. But no, we're not going to put the law upon them. We are going to free them up to follow after Jesus, and we will champion the movement of the Holy Spirit. Can we deny that the Holy Spirit has been working in this respective context, just like he's working in our context? Praise be to God. What's to keep us? I'm moving the analogy now a little bit deeper, but what's to keep us from baptizing them? You know, commissioning them, releasing them for the work of ministry. Our church body was set up in an American Christian climate. And we're no longer in Kansas anymore. And so we must work toward trust. I'll go a little bit deeper into where I think trust should start. I pray for your district president. For those who are in one of the 35 districts in the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. Pray that they would develop relationships with brothers who are in different contexts and view ministry and the practice of ministry differently. Because I am praying that the president of our synod would have love and trust with the district presidents to say, okay, what's it going to take in your Midwest context, in your Pacific Southwest context, in your New York City context, to reach people with the gospel. And I want to be as open-handed as I possibly can be with the systems and structures that are going to be necessary for the gospel to go forward in that environment. And pray for our synodical convention starting here in just a handful of months, man. Like, this is a huge time. Will the church respond in a churchly, confessional, conservative, and yet mission first, focused on the lost type of way? I pray we can walk in that sort of a balanced perspective. Anything else to add on that, Tim, before we move forward?
Love it.
I don't know that I said it all. People have heard me talk about this for a long time. So anyway, I could say more, but I'm going to ask, for leaders, last question, for leaders to lead well in not just a day, but for decades, what are the rhythms of self-care that help? You and I were both athletes, both were Concordia Seward Bulldogs, and I'm not saying that all pastors should be athletic, but the work of ministry is a physical thing. We just preached a message on honoring the body, honoring the temple of the Holy Spirit that God has given to us. So what are your rhythms for self-care? Because self-care, Tim, is not selfish, is it?
And this is what's so great about the sermon writing, because there were things that I was able to draw out of the text and apply it in real time that I would have never been able to think of, given the time constraints of a pastor, pushing out a sermon week by week. And to have that team kind of draw out some of those nuances allowed the sermon on honoring the body to be much more rich theologically. And then from a practical standpoint, what do I do to honor the body, the gift that God has given me? Like you said, I was a former athlete, but I like to paint myself as an athlete still to this day. So I like to be active 5 out of 7 days a week. And when I say that means an intentional time where I am working out. At the same time, I'm probably listening to some podcasts, maybe Lead Time or some of the podcasts to help in my leadership development. So I'm working on the physical, but I'd like to believe that I'm also working on the mind as well and the skill set of being a pastor. I think it's not necessarily physical, but I also do spend time. I try to wake up earlier than the rest of my family at the moment to dig into God's word as well on a daily basis. I'll be the first to admit that there are days that doesn't happen. But staying active, it's something that I do enjoy, but the more I can do it, the better my body feels. In terms of, products that I put in my body, I take just regular multivitamins, but I have found that just not overeating. I don't eat till I'm full. I eat till I'm satisfied. And so I'm not intentionally worried about the kinds of food I put in my body. I do eat fairly clean, but I'm more interested in the portions that I'm putting in my body.
That's awesome. A guy, they may look at you and say, man, that guy's metabolism runs super, super fast. I'm going to drop a knowledge bomb I just heard recently that absolutely blew my mind. Shout out to Sean Stevenson in the Model Health Show. He had a guy on, I don't remember the dude's name, but he was talking about a 2-year-old study that totally debunked people's understanding of the metabolic rate within their bodies. Because really, A metabolic reset is what we need to get toward a solid baseline of health. And what they discovered, it was a longitudinal study, 60,000 people from 1 day old to 90 years old. And what they found is there's 4 different phases of our metabolism. The first phase is birth to year 1. Your metabolism is going nuts during those years. You can't consume enough, super fast. From age 1 until 20, actually the metabolism doesn't speed up. It was so high to begin with, it actually comes down. And this kind of explains if processed food and a lot of these things, childhood obesity even can hit, because it's not going up, it's actually going down. Guess what it actually does, but very mildly. It doesn't go like this, it goes down just kind of mildly. From age 20 to age 60, guess what the metabolism does? Now, this is taking into account eating what God put in the ground, not a high processed diet, okay? Because fat, actually extra weight on our bodies, goes absolutely against what I'm about ready to tell you right now. From the age of 20 to 60 in this study, our metabolism stays exactly the same. So you are intended by God in those years. We're all going to die, but we're going to have more life in our years, or just years in our life. You are intended by God to stay exactly the same. Your body mass index, all those things are supposed to be the same. And then this is the mic drop of this study. The 4th phase, from the age of 60 until 90, guess how much your metabolism decreases? 17%. 17%, which that's not a lot. So the difference between a 20-year-old and a 90-year-old who is healthy, the metabolic rate is only 17% decreased. So this gives me like a lot of hope. I'll be 42 here. I think you're 42 or so, 43, Tim, right? Like I could have the same amount of energy moving at from now until I'm 60 years old. Based on how I take care of the daily rhythms, what I put into my body, that's the way I'm supposed to function. What the research had said actually before is that at certain stages, so for women like menopause or men hit middle age at 40, we thought that like, oh, the metabolism is just like slowly going down. That's not what the data found. That is mind blowing. We should be running very, very hard and not even retiring, man. Because if it only drops 17%, like retirement is an absolute myth. Continue giving your life away until the Lord calls you home. Any final words on that? Does that surprise you at all, Tim, Jack? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I was surprised by that. That's an interesting insight. I could see how that's true. That metabolism stays the same. I don't know that you recover as well when you're, let's say, in your late 40s as you would as a 25-year-old from strenuous exercise. But I could see how
you may have some wear and tear.
Yeah.
You may have some wear and tear. Yeah, for sure. But from a metabolism perspective, it's meant to be very, very static.
Yeah,
Anything, Tim,
I had
from your
heard that
perspective
as well. I wouldn't have been able to quote the source like you were able to, but I did read that recently, and it makes sense to me. I'll be honest, I'm not as active as I was 10 years ago, even though I like to paint myself as somebody that is active today. And I think that that's why, if I'm going to put on a pound or so or not be as healthy as I once was, it's because I am not as active as I once was. And I think that is the thing, as I read the article, is the impetus as to why people might lose an edge. It's because they're not being as active in their older years of life as opposed to when they were younger.
Use it or lose it, sister, unless we're actually using our bodies the way God intended. And that means pushing and pulling and sweating. My goal is to sweat every single day and to do something just about every single day that's push or pull oriented and anaerobic exercise. That's the final note. If you're going to just do one, aerobic or anaerobic, walking and running, that's all fine and well and good. But you get more actually physical and more than that mental benefits from pushing and pulling, even if if it's just air squats, planks, push-ups, those types of things, just using your body weight, you come alive. Final thing too, pastors are not considered the healthiest individuals. Church leaders, it's a high-stress job, right? You're dealing with a lot of pain, a lot of hurt. And I think to draw it all back, I think a part of, not the entirety of it, sin is the ultimate culprit of our division, but I think part of our division is our insecurities and our mindset that gets very, very narrow. And I think when I work out, when I care for the temple of the Holy Spirit, my mindset goes from narrow to broad, to see a variety of different perspectives, to hold only the gospel with a closed fist, but my brother or sister with an open hand, to release them to the Lord in all things. So let's care for our bodies, encourage one another in love. This is not a shame-filled kind of close to this podcast. Encourage each other to take our next steps on our wellness journey. These bodies are unbelievable. Tim, thanks for your generosity of time today, bro. You blessed us. If people want to connect with you and the Saving Grace Lutheran family, how could they do so?
On our website, savinggracelc.org. We've got material for you. We've got our sermons, and we're, always in the process of growth as well. So I'm sure that there's going to be other pathways. We have an app as well that you can utilize. Thanks to you guys in the ULC for encouraging us to get that on our platform. Yeah,
it's so good. We're proud of you. Yeah, love you, bro. And Jack, good work, man. This has been a lot of fun. This is Lead Time. This is a podcast of the Unite Leadership Collective. Sharing is caring. Like, subscribe, wherever it is that you're taking this, whether it's YouTube, Spotify, iTunes, whatever. Get the word out about what the Lord is doing and encourage one another. Build trust and love and care, as you heard from Pastor Tim today. It's a good day. Go and make it a great day. We'll see you next week on Lead Time.
Take care,
Thanks, brothers.
You've been listening to Lead Time, a podcast of the Unite Leadership Collective. The ULC consults and brings together cohorts of congregations to build the culture, systems, and structures of intentional discipleship multiplication. To go deeper with us, create a free login on uniteleadership.org for access to exclusive materials and resources. Thanks for listening, and stay tuned for next week's episode.